So good evening, everyone. And I'm also honored to be here and to engage in this conversation with James on the occasion of this book launch. I'm actually honored that you have asked me to join you, because I'm sure this is a very special moment for you. Mm-hmm. So I think the title of the book, Building Trust, Situating Repair, is actually well chosen because James is the master of repair. And I think later on we will hear more about that, how he understands that concept, which is quite central to his book. I think, talking about the slimness of the book, I couldn't recognize the dissertation anymore because it's quite changed and in a very, very, very interesting way. James writes very well. He's so clear, and the whole idea of writing a book around a workshop, really, around a workshop, that's just an amazing idea. And that is one of the things that makes this such a wonderful read. And so it's almost like a one day, if we could say it that way, a one-day ethnography. Very, very good. So I thought maybe I would start this conversation by inviting James to say a few words, or as many as you want, actually, about the story here. And maybe you can approach it the way you have also structured your book. Tell us about the characters, tell us about the plot, and tell us about the setting, and anything else that you feel like sharing with us.
Thank you very much, Elisio. It puts me in a rather comfortable position then to talk about those aspects of the book that I know the most about, which is the setting. So what happened during that one-day event? I just want to tell the audience first that basically the book is about disruption and about interruption. So as I'm speaking, if nothing makes sense or if you find that there's something unclear, you can just shout it out. I would be happy to change the course of my description a little bit. Okay, so the title is Building Trust, Situating Repair. So I've basically put two concepts in relationship to each other in order to account for a concrete social situation. So this social situation was a workshop that took place between a group of white commercial farmers, white Afrikaans-speaking commercial farmers in South Africa. Disruption. Rafi, do you want to say something? Okay, so you've got these farmers, you've got members of an NGO, a Dutch-funded NGO. You've got members of various government departments, all coming together to meet on a day to discuss why the farmers should be planting one type of plant rather than another, essentially. And the way that I usually describe the book is by saying, well, do you know a white South African farmer? It's kind of easy to explain their attitude towards outsiders as, please just go away. Please, you don't need to tell me how to manage my land. I've been doing it long enough and I think everything is fine. That was essentially the posture that I had observed, that the farmers were very skeptical of the government officials, of the nature conservationists and of the scientists. And they would try, rather interestingly, to kind of dispute certain facts that the scientists, the government and the NGOs were offering them in terms of how they ought to be managing their land. So what I do in the book is I take this workshop from beginning to end, and I divide the chapters up into different moments of that workshop. So chapter 1 is the introduction, which takes place inside of a farmer's shed. And I use that chapter to introduce what's going on here, what are some of the geomorphological issues being discussed by a PowerPoint presentation. But I also use that chapter to explain the role of so-called leading farmers in the history of South Africa. So farmers, progressive farmers who have emerged to try to bridge or to mediate between skeptical, I guess you could call them unprogressive farmers, but that's an unfortunate way of explaining it, but to mediate between farmers and scientists, so these leading farmers. Chapter 2 documents us leaving that shed and going out into the field. And this is my favorite chapter. I'm very biased, I'm sorry to say it. I shouldn't say things like this about a book that people should. But you know, we get out to the field and a scientist starts standing on top of a fence. And there's actually a really nice picture in the book of a guy standing on a fence taking a picture down the fence. And I thought, wow, that's a strange thing to be doing. And I noticed as we went to different sites, he kept taking pictures of these fences, and I thought, okay, I don't get it. And then as the day went on, the farmers also started to look at the fence and start asking questions about the fence. So that whole chapter is about what is so important about this fence. And essentially, anybody could see that on one side is green and on one side is brown. So obviously on one side there's a problem and on the other side there's no problem. Things are, of course, more complicated than that, and the farmers show how the scientists' models are not easily transferable to a visual sighting of a fence line, as they're called, so a difference on either side of the fence. Gosh, I hope I don't give too many details, so you don't actually not read the book. You should really read it. I highly encourage it. Luckily, there's only 2 more chapters, so this moment of mine is not going to go on too long. Chapter 3 is really, how should I say, an acquired taste. Chapter 3, I go into what's called conversation analysis. So I look at exactly how it is that the farmers and the scientists are speaking to each other. I take the recording that I was given, and I break down their speech. I look at the back and the forth and how they're disputing each other. And I try to tease out some findings from there. And one of the findings that I come across in chapter 3 is that what is at stake is the concept of nature or natural. What is natural? That's the title of the chapter. So they're basically debating a very difficult concept. What is natural? I mean, that's not something that will get solved during a day-long workshop, but it's very interesting what emerges out of there. So you should read the book and you'll see what emerges out of there, because I think it's a major finding. It's a major finding for scholarship, but I think it's just it's major in the sense that it's an account of what actually happened there. I think it's, you know, whatever we think reality is, as I think Elisio might have a comment to make, it is sort of a construction of people having a conversation about and sort of building up a world for each other. So they're building up the reality for each other. So the farmers and the scientists are, in chapter 3, building up a particular reality about which nature plays an important role. So, we're at chapter 4. What is chapter 4 all about? Well, chapter 4 becomes a little bit speculative. And chapter 4 is about repair people. So people who emerge to fix things. And typically when we think of repair, we think of a chair breaking and then somebody coming and fixing it, which is for sure one aspect of repair. And the scientists in this case are trying to repair a degraded ecology. So I could go into more detail. Please ask me about what's going on ecologically in my field site, at my field site, which, sorry, by the way, is in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, in a mountainous region. But chapter 4 is not just about people fixing things, it's also about people who fix people's orientation to things. So it's not only people fixing material stuff, but people fixing how others think about those materialities. And those are the repair people. And I try to package that as well as I can into a longer history in Southern Africa of people who have emerged to fix ecological or agricultural institutions. And our own Julia Tischler from the history department was an article I came by that helped me a lot with that chapter. So I tried to get into conversation with her there. I urge you all to read the conclusion, and I don't want to give it away. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. That's well done. Well, you don't have to give away anything, but you can help people to read your book. And I think one of the most exciting things about the book is the set of concepts which you work with in the book. And I think that can help people actually understand what you have in mind. So maybe we could go through them just briefly. And we can start with the title. So you have this idea of building trust. And you've already indicated who the actors are, who the relevant actors are. So commercial farmers, but also NGOs, government officials, and the scientists. Yeah. So what made for you the concept of trust necessary in this setting? You know, was it the fact that these are people who approach the world in different ways, and therefore they are in need of reassuring themselves that they are talking about the same thing and that they can rely on other people to mean what they say? Or is trust necessary in this connection because of the nature of the dangers that they are facing? Because obviously commercial farmers have their livelihood depend on a sound ecological environment. So yeah, why is trust so interesting, and why is it so important that you look into how it is built in this setting?
Thank you, Elisio. I feel, of course, very comfortable in this setting. You know, this is a sort of a family environment for me. So I have to sometimes check that I don't answer too ironically why it is that I went for trust. Yeah. But what comes to mind is that, you know, as a young PhD student, I was very unsure what to study. I just knew where I was. I was in Basel, and I had some contacts in South Africa and some cultural knowledge of South Africa, so I could put those two things together. And then I met a very interesting professor at that time by the name of Elisio Macamo, who said to me about my project, well, you know what? As one option, why don't you look at how trust mediates people's relationship with science and technology. Because I knew that I wanted to look at science and technology and I didn't know how. So you mentioned this term trust. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make my professor very happy and I'm going to deliver something on trust and it's going to be great. But I learned not quickly, it took me a long time, a lot of reading to realize that trust is a huge topic, first of all. People mean completely different things when they say it. Not only in everyday life, but also in scholarship. It's all about traditions. So then I had to figure out what kind of sociologist am I? Am I a phenomenologist philosophically? How am I going to get my data? And all of that was shaped by somebody once telling me, why don't you go look at trust? So after all that thinking, I finally looked at data. I was so lost, and then I thought one day, well, why don't I just go look at my data? And then things got a lot clearer to me. Because then I started to realize that they're actually talking about trust. So if trust means anything, why don't I just look at how it means to these people that I'm working with? So I started accounting for how the farmers, the scientists, government officials, and NGO members use the term trust. And what I noticed there is that, well, I'm not satisfied. Because when they say trust, they're not actually talking about trust. They're talking about conditions of mistrust. They're talking about why we need to get people to trust us, or why there is this lack of trust between farmers and outsiders. So it wasn't about trust. I wanted to know what trust is. So to make a very long story short, I finally came to the most plausible way of looking at trust, which is people sharing meaning. Meaning that trust has nothing to do with whether I like you or not. It just has to do with the fact that we're talking to each other and we can understand each other. When we're talking to each other and we can understand what it is we're saying, then there's trust happening there. It's a very simple conclusion, but I think it's a conclusion that you can use the term trust to then go show something with. I mean, I could spend the rest of, a career, let's put it ambitiously, to look at trust, but I think I came up with a very easy and straightforward way of looking at it. And you will all see in chapter 3 that trust starts getting visible there. And that's what I mean by it.
Okay, very good. So a disclaimer now. I had actually forgotten that I'd suggested that to him. So I was not fishing for any compliments. I'd really forgotten. Right. But yeah, you did well with that. You see,
Thanks.
Of course, trust is something that you can always lose, right? So it's not like you build it and then you have it forever. So it's almost like saying that it's something that you have to work on all the time. And in that sense, I think something interesting happens there, which is that, of course, trust can break down, and then people have to do something to rebuild it, right? So I wonder if you can make that connection clearer to everyone here between the breakdown of trust and all the things that you have to do to put it together again, perhaps using the notion of repair, which of course on the one hand refers to fixing things like you said, so material things, but to a certain extent it could also be taken to mean the work that is done to rebuild pair, such that in social life, probably most of the time, what we are doing is repairing our ties, our social ties. So perhaps you could translate that as rebuilding trust constantly.
I need to ask the publishers if I can retitle it Rebuilding Trust and Situating Repair, because it's true what you say. I mean, trust, I guess in the way that I've come to understand it, is, a constant achievement. It takes work. And that constant achievement and that work, I think, is something that a sociologist or an anthropologist or an ethnographer can work on documenting in a very procedural way. Repair is really the concept I like. Trust, it's like a hot potato. It came into my hand and then I figured out something to do with it, and I came to repair as I don't know what you would call it, Elisio. It's a concept, it's a theory, and it's a method. I find in this one term, repair. I think there's so much one can do with that. So, yeah. I mean, it's a tradition that has its roots in people like in sociology, Irving Goffman and Harold Garfinkel. People that looked very closely at discourse and at conversation. And they looked at the microdynamics needed. I mean, Elisio is being quiet now as I'm speaking. And I know, and he knows that that's how we should be doing things. This is a feature of a microdynamic of interaction. So I think if Elisio were to interrupt me, or if somebody from the audience were to, which I hope you do, we would have to get into detail about how it is then I would be repairing that situation, but that would cause the conditions for repair. That there is some type of breakdown in the stability of this social situation, and somebody has to put in extra work to sort that out. And if they don't sort it out, and they just tell, if somebody asks a question, I just tell you to go away, there's no trust going on there. So repair, to try and put it shortly, is a feature of trust building that happens in face-to-face communication. And in face-to-face communication, one can gather data and one can make an analysis of trust using repair.
No, I mean, I really like what you did with that concept. Of course, I knew the work done around the concept by conversational analysis and so on. So it was like a staple concept in that field. But looking at how you deployed that concept in this particular thesis made me aware of far-reaching implications of that concept, such that I think it's a concept that we might need to revisit, one that we might want to integrate even more in what we do. And I'm thinking in particular about the extent to which we can make the claim that, so this would be in the context of the sociology of knowledge, because one basic premise of the sociology of knowledge is that we are interested in the certainty that people have that reality exists, right? So where does that certainty come from? That's the basic premise of the sociology of knowledge. So they are not making any assumptions about the existence of reality, right? Now, I think that is interesting as far as I'm concerned, because you could also make a case, and that's the case I tried to make in the preface, because that's when I realized that, when you asked me to write the preface, and I had to go through the book again, that's when I realized that there's a strong case we can make for the idea that reality is an illusion, and that all we do, when we interact with one another is to sustain that illusion, right? And I think we sustain that illusion by repairing, right? What do you think about that? Shouldn't that have been the title?
You see, it's a good thing I finished my PhD and wrote a book, because now you can give me things to think about. So we might be here all night if I try to eat that up. And I think it's a good provocation, because I've been trying very hard to understand you for over a decade in micro bits, and at risk of being your sounding board. But I think there's definitely potential in there, because you see in repair a possibility that I would authorize, knowing what I know about the literature and reading through that, because I think that it's very possible to go in that direction. And I think talking about repair as the thing which is operational when people go about sustaining a reality together could very much contribute to African studies, in particular from the angle of the sociology of knowledge, in the sense, as you've shown in your work, that the idea of Africa is, to put it very crudely, a construction, and it's functional because of that. The concept makes the reality didn't make the concept, in a way. I mean, of course, you should all read Elisio's work too, I would say, because that then gets us, I think, a little bit further in our discipline, in African studies and sociology. Although I think we're using sociology to make an impact into African studies. So I think should I close? Because I could now read a few words from your lovely preface.
Okay, you can read. Go ahead.
And then maybe open it up. Yeah. No, because we're talking about the preface that you wrote, which you keep saying that you're honored, and I say I'm honored, but I would also really honored that you did this, and it's another reason to buy this book. So I just want to read out a passage from Elisio here. Sociologists do not observe reality. They observe individuals going about their business. Here we see nature conservationists, there we see farmers, so in the reality of my observation. They are not, at least not necessarily, protecting nature or securing their livelihood, but in some sense they are. As James Meron powerfully suggests, they are negotiating what it means to do the sort of things they do. In the process, they take steps back and ask themselves whether they are sure about what they think they know. They are doing. Do they really think they know what they are doing? And they are never done in this task. But while at it, what they do may allow the sociologist to appreciate the emergent properties of action. One such emergent property is trust, that James Meron skillfully peels free from the competing representations, providing the broader canvas against which they are themselves. There's a lot to pick out in there. There are many pieces to put together in that short statement there. So I would open it up to questions, and I would say thank you again very much for engaging with this work.